What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Have the Giants officially leapfrogged the D-backs in the NL West standings? Well, we got Ben Kaspick of Locked on Giants to debate.
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? Always charismatic host of this podcast, Miller Thomas. We are slowly approaching 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, so please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. But now, without further ado, to discuss Blake Snell to the Giants and to discuss if the Giants have leapfrogged the D-backs in the NL West standings, we of course got Ben Kaspick of Locked on Giants on today's podcast for a little crossover. Ben, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. I can't wait to discuss this, and especially with the context of our NL West preview kind of show that's coming out on the same day probably as this podcast. So that's going to be a lot of we got a lot to cover today, Millard.
Yeah, I'm putting disclaimers out before that podcast roundtable drops because, guys, we recorded that weeks ago. I've been letting people know every time I've done that little, ad break read, like, listen, when that roundtable drops, the takes are gonna sound old because we recorded that about 3 weeks ago, pre-Snell, pre-Cease, before a lot of these big deals in the NL West, because the Giants are not done this offseason. The NL West is still chugging along. We just discussed recently, Dylan Cease to the Padres on our podcast last week. But now, Ben, we got Blake Snell to the Giants, the reigning Cy Young Award winner, not even switching divisions, just switching teams. The Giants were a team that have quietly been picking up pieces as we've gotten later into the season. Jorge Soler was like, wasn't that like a post-New Year signing? You recently got Blake Snell this past week. Like, how were the Giants able to pull off the Blake Snell move, and why are they so late to the game when it comes to adding quality pieces?
Well, Matt Chapman as well. Soler, Chapman too, and Snell all signed in spring training after spring training started. And like you said, I mean, it's kind of unfair to you who had some takes. Like when we recorded, it was like the beginning of spring training. I don't remember exactly when it was, but you're right, about 3 weeks ago. Yeah, it was so long ago, we can't remember. But how did they do it? Well, they were patient, and the markets kind of collapsed for these guys. And there were a bunch of teams that like normally spend that kind of were in a bind for various reasons. You know, the RSN deals for like the Rangers, and that's keeping them like, there's mutual interest in Jordan Montgomery, just for example, there, and they're still having a hard time getting that done. And the Yankees didn't want to pay because they'd have to pay 110% tax on every dollar spent, given where they are in the luxury tax situation. And the Dodgers are like done because they committed so much already. The Padres kind of, for the first time in a while, took a little bit of a step back from a spending standpoint. I know they just traded for Cease, but he's relatively cheap. And the Mets, right? They didn't go out and go crazy like they have in recent off seasons either. So Giants just kind of sat this one out and just kind of were lurking, and it was just like, are they going to do it? They need to do this in order to get relevant again. They've obviously tried to spend money in recent seasons, off seasons.
Correa,
Judge and Correa, and Harper not that long ago as well, and they just haven't been able to get guys to take their money. But this offseason, nobody has spent more than the Giants except for the Dodgers this winter, and it's not really particularly close. And so it is an interesting question to ask: have they leapfrogged the D-backs? Certainly, they've leapfrogged quite a few teams that, going into the offseason they were probably behind.
Yeah, and we won't even get to that question just yet, Ben. I'm gonna save that little tease for segment number 2 here. But it seemed like the Houston Astros were maybe the other team in this race for Blake Snell. It sounded like it was coming down to those two teams. Why do you think Blake Snell decided to go with the Giants then? Did he want to stay on the West Coast? Was it just the familiarity of being still in the NL West? Like, what made him choose to stay or choose to sign with San Fran?
Well, what I read was that the Astros balked at the asking price, which I thought was kind of insane. Like, I did a podcast the day that Snell ended up signing. He signed like in the evening, and I did one in the morning where, it was a Bob Nightingale report. So I was like, take this with a grain of salt. He's not always the most accurate reporter, but he is a reporter. And he said that the Astros were suddenly long shots because they were balking at the asking price of at least 2 years and $60 million. And I was like, what? Like, how much lower can you realistically expect this guy to accept coming off the season that he just came off of and the pedigree that he has, 2 Cy Young awards, 2 years, 60 million with an opt out. What did the Astros expect? It's kind of like what I was thinking. And it was a luxury tax situation where signing Snell would push them past the second threshold. Mm-hmm. And for the Giants, before this signing, they were under the first luxury tax threshold. And so they were kind of not uniquely, but among the teams that actually were legitimate suitors for him, they were the team with the most kind of ability to make the move without penalty, right? Like the Yankees, it was a matter of the penalty with the tax. And I think with the Astros, it came down to the same thing, which is their loss, Giants gained. So I'm shocked a little bit at what both Chapman and Snell ended up getting, like considering going into the offseason. If you had told me Snell would get 2 years and 62 million, and Chapman, I already forget what the contract is, 3 years and what is it, 73 or 81 or something million. And even Bellinger, with the 3-year deal, I think we thought those guys might get a combined 500 million plus. Oh, and here I just got an email right now. The deal is now official. Giants have signed Blake Snell.
Well, the Giants have been a team in the last couple off seasons. Yes, they've tried to get those position players, but we've seen players like the Kevin Gausmans and the Carlos Rodons. Like the Giants have let them walk in free agency. So why was a guy like Blake Snell? Is it because even though the annual salary is high, is it because it's only a short-term deal that the Giants don't mind paying for Snell? Is it because he's coming off a season where he won the Cy Young? Like, why were the Giants paying Blake Snell, but allowed guys like Carlos Rodon and Kevin Gausman, who were in their respective rights also coming off strong seasons, allowing them to walk in free agency?
Well, I mean, they did sign Rodon to a 2-year deal. And so, maybe there's a case to make that we've talked about this probably 5 different times over the years where they just seemingly have a preference for shorter term deals when it comes to free agent pitchers who are in their 30s, right? Mm-hmm. They did give a 5-year extension to Logan Webb, but he's younger. And they also really tried to sign Yoshinobu Yamamoto, but he's younger. He's 25 years old. And so I think it has to do with age. And for Snell, the fact that the Giants didn't give him a 5 or 6 year deal, nobody did, but the fact that they weren't out in front trying to do that maybe speaks to that fact. And right now, Gausman's dealing with a shoulder injury, and Rodon last year was kind of a disaster. So I don't know. Like, there's definitely.
Yeah, do you think teams look at like that Rodon deal from last year and they're like, man, he already had that health history. He got the 6 for 180. Like maybe this offseason we just take a step back from all these, mega pitcher contracts and do a little bit more, short-term overpay like the Giants did.
Yeah, I think that teams like the Giants, they will prefer to pay a lot over a shorter term than to pay less per year over a longer term, because you can end up getting stuck with, I mean, a famous example that we've definitely talked about before is Patrick Corbin, of course, former D-back. He was really, really good towards the end of his D-backs tenure. And then he's been like the worst pitcher in baseball since going to I mean, he had one good year there, I think. And then speaking of the Nationals, right, Steven Strasburg comes to mind. So there's just some scary kind of contracts that have happened for pitchers. And, I'm not saying I would have been upset if they had signed Snell to a longer term deal, like 4 or 5 years. But given that he's already 31, I mean, I was always saying like 5 at the most. I don't want to see anything more than 5 probably. But to get him for 2 with an opt out is big, and also the fact is that they've had 2 really disappointing seasons in a row, and so this is a team that's trying to win. They're not trying to like rebuild; they're trying to win, and so they felt a lot of pressure. The pressure has just ratcheted up in recent years as they've continued to flounder. Basically, with just the one good year since 2016, they had 2021 with the 107 wins, but other than that, since 2016, Millard, they've just been mediocre to bad. And so they just feel a lot of pressure to get better.
Well, now, the Giants are coming off a pretty good offseason. Soler, Chapman, you traded for the Robbie Rays. You added Blake Snell to the rotation. So this Giants team does have a lot more talent than last year. I want to ask you, Ben, if you think they have enough talent to now surpass the D-backs in the NL West standings. But before we get into that conversation, if you, of course, want to catch any D-backs or Giants games this season, the best place to buy your tickets is going to be Game Time, because Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total upfront, so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. With zone deals, you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for big time savings. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Back here on the Locked On Diamondbacks crossover with Ben Kaspick of Locked On Giants. And Ben, I want to ask you if you think the Giants, after an offseason of, recently in the last month and a half, making a flurry of moves to improve their lineup and rotation, if you think the Giants have done enough to surpass the D-backs in the NL West, because I do have a couple of FanDuel odds for you, Ben, that I want to throw out to you real quick, because looking at like the odds for the Giants pre the Blake Snell signing, they were definitely behind the D-backs and the Padres in the NL West projected standings. They were behind them in just, the overall NL playoff field. But if you look at it right now, FanDuel has all the National League teams in one bracket, has their percentage next to each team, their odds to make the playoffs next to each team. And they actually have the Giants at plus 115 to make the playoffs, Padres plus 120, D-backs plus 125. So FanDuel is actually telling you right now they think the Giants are more likely to make the playoffs than the Padres or D-backs. But then if you look at division winner, they have the D-backs and Padres at plus 1,100, Giants at plus 1,200. So they think the Giants are more likely to get a wild card spot, but D-backs or Padres more likely to win the division somehow. So I say all that to say it's basically even, that they think the D-backs, Giants, and Padres are basically all on the same level. So I want to ask you, how would you now divvy up those 3 teams in the NL West? It seems like everyone has the Dodgers 1, everyone has the Rockies 5, but that middle meat of the NL West, Padres, Giants, and D-backs, how would you now divvy up those 3 places?
Everyone but you has the Rockies 5.
Okay, yeah, hey, don't spoil that round table now. Hold on.
Yeah, tune in tomorrow for Pacific. Hear Millard bash the Giants pre-knowing that they were going to sign Chapman and Snell. But yeah, I mean, in all seriousness, it's hard to say, and that those are some weird odds. That Giants favored over those other 2 to make the playoffs in general, or right, just to make the playoffs in general.
Yeah.
But the other two favored to win the division ahead of the Giants. That's a little weird. Like
it's very strange how
I can't really explain that. But I think there is a lot of parity in the National League outside of the two teams at the top, and I would say the two teams at the bottom. And maybe the three teams, maybe throw the Pirates in there. I think the Pirates are probably a tier ahead of the Rockies and the Nationals, but maybe not. But other than that, I mean, you look at the Central. I think you look at. I know you didn't ask me about the Central, but you know, I think there's four teams that could win the Central, and then you look at the West, and there's three teams that could easily be the second place team in the West. And of course, you know, 2021 taught Giants fans and all of us that you never really know who's going to win the division, even if you think you do, even if you've got a juggernaut like the Dodgers. Somehow the 2021 Giants won the West. But like if I have no idea. That's the thing about baseball. We've been doing this long enough to know, like, baseball is really hard to predict. And I mean, last year, the D-backs, it's not like they won 95 games, right? They won 84.
Negative differential entering the postseason.
Yeah. And they had that horrible stretch, like around the All-Star break and after. And the Giants were ahead of them, like probably going into September or thereabouts. And Giants fell apart. And the D-backs leapfrogged them, and so did the Padres at the end, because the Giants really fell apart towards the end. And so with all the moves that they've made, I mean, I could easily see it. I could easily see the Giants like having everything go right and having them win 90 games or more, maybe. But I'm not sitting here saying that I'm certain that's going to happen, you know, but I think that they're probably a team that wins more than 80. And that's, you know, they didn't last year. I think it's worth pointing out they won 79, only 5 fewer, despite a horrible collapse. They won, you know, they were basically a 500 team last year, and they've made a lot of moves to get better. And like Jung-Hoo Lee, we didn't even mention, and Jordan Hicks is a really interesting pitcher that they added. And, you know, full season of Patrick Bailey, who kind of broke out as a defensive monster last season. And Kyle Harrison in the starting rotation is the top left-handed pitching prospect in baseball. And he debuted last year, and he's 22 years old, and he's going to be in that rotation from day one. And they've, like you said, they've also got Robbie Ray coming back at some point, and he won the 2021 Cy Young Award, and they've got Alex Cobb coming back. And so all of a sudden it's, you know, Logan Webb, Blake Snell, Robbie Ray, Alex Cobb, Kyle Harrison, Jordan Hicks, and then they've got a lot of young pitching even behind all those guys. Plus you get a Matt Chapman, improves the offense and the defense. The defense has kind of been a problem in recent years. Jung-Hoo Lee, I think, improves the offense and the defense, and Patrick Bailey, a full season of him, improves the defense. So I don't know. I think it's long story short, I don't know. It's tough to say, but I like a lot. Like, we didn't get a chance at, like, in our previous crossovers, I've wanted to mention, I like the moves that the D-backs have made. But it's also worth pointing out they won 84 games with a negative run differential. It's not like they were some total juggernaut. It's just the fact that they went to the World Series and they're on the rise. That's the thing. It's a lot of their talent is young talent, right? And so, what do you think? I mean, do you think? How do you kind of see that? I never actually gave you a straight answer.
No, it's fine. I don't know is a fine answer. They're all basically on the same level.
Roll the dice, like pick them out of a hat, and let's just put the Javi's not here, so let's put the Padres fourth, and kind of call it one of the D-backs of the Giants in second.
Yeah, I was going to say, talking with Javi of Locked On Padres, I think when we were debating between our two teams, I think we both decided like that number 3 spot in the rotation was going to be critical. Erod versus Yu Darvish, we both thought that was going to be like the swing pieces for both of our teams. Whoever number 3 pitches whoever number 3 pitcher pitches better, we think will probably finish better in the standings. I wonder if the same is going to be true for the Giants because, like you just said, there could potentially be a full rotation there after Blake Snell, but I think there is some question marks. Kyle Harrison, how good will he be immediately as a rookie? How quickly does Alex Cobb come back? How quickly does Robbie Ray come back? And, how good do both of those guys look coming off injury? So I think for the Giants, just as the same as the D-backs and Padres, like whoever that third guy is behind Blake Snell and Logan Webb might just be just as important because I think that number 3 piece and the rotation for Giants, D-backs, and Padres are all going to be like the major X factor for those 3 teams as we, go through the regular season, and even the number 4 starter as well, because, it could be Michael King for the Padres. It could be Fott for the D-backs, or, if you get your guys back, it could be Kyle Harrison. Maybe he's the breakout pitching prospect this upcoming season, because is he fully rookie eligible for this upcoming year?
I mean, he pitched some last year, but I do believe he is still a rookie because he didn't pitch that much. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, Ben, I also want to play a little game in segment number 3. Now that you have Blake Snell, I want to play this little game of, we're going to say a name. It's going to be Blake Snell or the other pitcher. So it's going to be different aces in the NL West. I want you to tell me you're going to take Snell or the other guy in the NL West. So we're going to play that game in segment number 3 so we can decide if Blake Snell is still the best pitcher in the NL West, of course, coming off the Cy Young Award. But if you want to, do any picks with the Blake Snell, potentially win some money, then the best place to do that is Prize Picks, because football season may be over, but the action on the floor is heating up. Whether it's tournament season or the fight for playoff home court, there's no shortage of high-stakes basketball moments this time of year. Get in on the excitement with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where you can turn your hoops knowledge into serious cash. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. So just go download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app Prize Picks, use code all lowercase LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right. Back here, Locked On crossover, Ben Kaspick of Locked On Giants. And Ben, I want to play a little game to decide if you think Blake Snell is the best pitcher in the NL West. So I'll give you Blake Snell, and then I'll give you a random ace pitcher from the NL West, and you tell me who you would rather have. Okay. We'll start off with our guy, Blake Snell or Zach Gallen. Who would you rather?
I got to do this without looking up any numbers or anything like that.
We're going right off the gut.
Right off the gut,
and we're these guys.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them. Yeah, but are we talking like forgetting about contracts? We're just talking like
ace of your rotation.
Okay, but under what terms? Just for next year?
Yeah,
this year,
this upcoming season. Who do you want to lead your staff? Throw the contracts aside. Throw the age aside. Pure talent. Who do you want?
I can't help myself. I'm looking at Zach Gallen's numbers. I'm sorry.
You can do it.
I'm taking Blake Snell.
Man, all right. Number 1, Snell over Gallen. Number 2,
close.
It's close though. All these are going to be close. I mean, I'm not going to fight you really either way. I mean, those were the 2 finalists, right? Blake Snell won it, but you could have given it to Zach Gallen the first 60% of the season last year. So I'm not going to fight you either way. Blake Snell or the other pitcher for the Giants, Logan Webb.
I'm going to take Logan Webb because of command and innings. Webb led the major leagues in innings, and Webb has just Snell is a little bit inconsistent at times in his career, and he's had some down years, and he's had, he led the majors in walks, and so for Webb, I think the floor is high and the ceiling is high. For Snell, the ceiling is super high, but the floor is a little bit lower. And I think it's a little more kind of steady Eddie reliable for Logan Webb. It just depends on what you want. It kind of reminds me of like Tim Lincecum and Matt Cain for a while. Okay. It was kind of like You get your steady Eddie Matt Cain. You get your like extreme upside Tim Lincecum.
Ooh. Sounds like a good podcast title. Is Blake Snell, Logan Webb the new Lincecum Matt Cain? I don't know. That might have to be a podcast.
Or Randy Johnson, Kurt Schilling.
Okay.
The last two first and second place Cy Young Award vote getters to be in a rotation together the next year were Schilling and Johnson. And now it's Snell and Webb.
That's a fun fact. Okay, maybe that's your podcast title then. Blake Snell or Tyler Glasnow?
Snell all day. Glasnow, I'm sorry, but he's hurt all the time. I mean, how many innings? He's thrown like 9 innings in the last 4 years or something. Crazy.
Hey, he's coming off his career high 120 innings pitched last season. So
okay. I'm tripping then. Yeah, but before that,
that's his career high 120 though.
Okay,
that was like
career high 120, and I don't know the number, less walks, but the numbers otherwise look kind of similar in terms of strikeouts, strikeout rate is what I mean, and run prevention wasn't as good. He's just not as durable. I think it's probably closer than I gave it, by calling it an easy call. But I think Glasnow he's been made of glass, so to speak.
That's fair.
And so I'm taking the guy who's been Snell for all his, for the faults that he does have, he's been more durable.
Mm-hmm. Hey, if Glasnow pitches 180 innings, he might win the Cy Young. We've never seen him get anywhere close to that. So he has to stay healthy for us to give him a little bit more respect, probably. How about Snell or a guy we've never seen before? Yamamoto.
I gotta go Yamamoto. Like just
wow.
To be, I'm not one of these guys who says, "What, the Dodgers are crazy for giving him this money, even though he's never thrown a pitch in the majors." I think that he's going to be a star. I think the Dodgers don't make that kind of commitment just for nothing. I think there were a lot of smart teams that were after this guy for similar money, including the Giants, including the Mets. Even though the Mets didn't really spend, one guy they were willing to make an exception on was Yamamoto, and maybe not next year. Maybe it takes him a minute to adjust or whatever. But still, when all is said and done, I think that Yamamoto is kind of a complete pitcher. He's not going to have the command issues that Snell has. He probably will strike people out, and I think the durability is there, and he's just a complete pitcher where there are some flaws that you can point to with Snell.
I got kind of a wild one. Snell or Joe Musgrove, which I think could be a little bit closer than what people may think if you take like the full body work from like the last 3 years, just because Snell has a little bit of that up and down nature.
Yeah, this is another one where I really want to look at the numbers because Joe Musgrove, he's
basically been like a 3 ERA flat the last 3 years. Like I think his numbers are more impressive than what people realize when they just hear the name Joe Musgrove.
I mean, Joe Musgrove is good and underrated, and we saw him kind of really perform well in the postseason for them when they made it to the NLCS in 22. Only pitched though 97 innings last year. Mm-hmm. So I don't really know. He didn't like break his toe or something in a weight room accident, I think. So that's a tough one. Oh man, Miller, this is a tough game. I might have to go Joe Musgrove just to be
interesting. Okay. I thought you would have said Snell easily, but when you do look at the numbers, you're like, dang, Joe actually good ERA, good strikeout numbers, and doesn't walk people. He does like everything you'd want a really good
consistent
top 2 pitcher to do.
Yeah, and like he does throw the innings. Mm-hmm. I as long as the injury last year was just the toe and like a freak weight room accident, I think he dropped like a kettlebell on his toe. Ouch. But if it was like an arm injury or something that I'm forgetting about, then I'll definitely take Snell. But it's close again. Like these are good. These are premier talents.
Yeah, these are all guys that we're going to face in the NL West. I mean, there's going to be guys. I got one more name for you, but names I'm not going to mention, like Yu Darvish, Walker Buehler, Eduardo Rodriguez, Clayton Kershaw, Robbie Ray potentially. Like there's still going to be potential, top 2 pitchers that we're not even going to discuss in this little exercise that are going to be number 3 for some of our teams in the NL West. So very stacked pitching group in the division. But last one for you, Ben, Blake Snell or the other new newbie to the NOS, Dylan Cease.
Mm.
And I throw this one, me and Javi are talking about it. Blake Snell is basically the lefty Dylan Cease. You look at the strikeout numbers, you look at the walk rates, like they're kind of the same guy. They're just one's a righty and one's a lefty.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go Snell here. And I mean, I think that Cease, obviously, if you look at it, holds the edge in durability and like innings. The last 3 years, I assume in 2020 it was 12 starts in 2020. I assume that was a full season, but he's made 32, 32, and 33 starts the last 3 seasons. No lower than 165 and 2/3 innings, with high strikeout rates. But the reason I have to go with Snell is 2 out of those 3 years, we're talking last year, Cease had an ERA of 4.58, and Snell was at like what, 2.20, basically like literally more, like less than half of Cease's ERA. So how am I going to go with Cease there? And then in 2021, Cease's ERA was 3.91. Although what's crazy is that actually Cease had a 2.20 ERA 2 years ago, which wasn't that exactly what I just said was Snell's ERA last year. So that is an interesting one. It's kind of recency bias, but you got to go with recency bias if it's kind of that close. I'm going to go with who was better most recently, and that was definitely Snell. Cease, the peripheral numbers were good, strikeouts and all that, but the ERA was over 4.5, so I got to go with Snell.
Sorry, I think my Wi-Fi dropped out there for a second at the end when you were talking. But thankfully, we are at the very end of the podcast. I might have lost like the last 10 seconds of what you said there. So I don't know if you want to recap what you just said there for the last 10 seconds, just in case.
Snell over Cease. ERA was better.
Sum it up. So basically, after doing this game, the only pitchers you think are better than Blake Snell in the NOS are Logan Webb, Yamamoto, and Joe Musgrove. And I don't know if other people would have picked those, names to say are better than Blake Snell. So very interesting list. I don't think anyone would argue too hard because those are elite pitchers in the game. They're all in the division, which is potentially going to be the toughest division in baseball. Do you think it's going to be the toughest division this year, them or the AL East?
Them or the AL East, for sure. The AL East, I would give it to before the Giants went ham the last month, I would probably have given it to the AL East, but Giants doing what they've done the last month maybe changes it. But man, there's some good teams, like several very good teams in the East, whereas the 3 teams outside of the Dodgers in the West, like maybe aren't quite on the same level. I don't know. Tough. Again, hard to predict, but it's one of the two for sure, I think.
Yeah, and I think we're going to have to make another offline wager, Ben. Who's going to finish higher in the NOS standings? I mean, you got the reigning Cy Young Award winner, so it's going to be a little bit tougher now, but we'll definitely chat offline. D-backs versus Giants. I still got to cook out your graphic.
You never made me pay, man.
I'm going to make you pay. We're going to make it for the start of the regular season. That's how I'm going to do it. Then we're going to remind everyone to start the year. Millard won last year's bet. I think that's a great way.
No, you may have expired, man.
We'll see. I'm going to cook it up. We'll see. But that has been Kaspick of Locked On Giants. Ben, where can the listeners find you online?
At Ben Kaspick on Twitter, Kaspick. And the show Locked On Giants on Twitter at LO_SF Giants, and then on YouTube and wherever you can find your podcast. The show is called Locked On Giants. And how about you, Millard? Where can my listeners find your great work?
Yep, at Creator Thomas 24 for my personal account on Twitter. Look up Locked On Diamondbacks, both Twitter, Instagram for the podcast handle. And please hit subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube, as well as the Locked On Giants. Ben Kaspick, another crossover. We'll definitely be talking again in the future. We'll be making some wagers. And please, guys, remember that roundtable that you probably hear today, that was recorded weeks ago. Deuces, everyone.